Hey friends, welcome to part 2 of Fullstack application development course. In the previous video, we saw how you can configure Authorizer, Hasura, Postgres and Redis on Railway.app and get the secure backend layer out of the box. So we have our GraphQL API ready using Hasura, and we have our authentication and authorization layer ready using Authorizer. In this part, we will see how you can create a React application and consume those GraphQL APIs to create a nice UI. So let's get started. First, we will be creating a React app using create React app. Alright, now that our application is bootstrapped, we need to install few dependencies to make this application work. So the first dependency that we will need is authorizer-react. Authorizer-react gives us a built-in components to render all the UI requirements. So login screen will be rendered using authorizer-react. You can have forgot password, you can have Google, Facebook, every other login, whatever you have configured from your backend. Authorizer-react is smart enough to render those buttons as per your configuration. So we will be installing authorizer-react first. So I'll go to to-do app. Open that in a editor and let's install authorizer-react. Next, we need urql. This library is used to make the GraphQL request to Hasura endpoint so that we can, call those mutations like insert to do, update to do, get to do's. So I will copy this and install this library. The third dependency that we will need is React Router DOM. So we will have few different pages in our application. One of them is, let's say, the home page, which is rendered first. Then we will have a login screen where user can go and log in. And the third page that we will have, let's call it a dashboard page, where you will be able to create to-dos, list to-dos and update to-dos. Okay. So for that, let's go ahead and install React Router DOM. Because we are going to do like a browser side rendering or client side rendering, so we need React Router DOM and browser provider. Alright, now that our application is bootstrapped and our dependencies are installed, let's go ahead and create few pages. So I will create a new folder over here called pages. I will create few pages as discussed. So home.tsx, then we will have login.tsx, then we will have dashboard.tsx. Okay, and let's also add some component to it. Similarly, we will have a home component. And then we will have a login component. So here we will have export default function login, return h1 login. Alright, now that our components are defined, let's go ahead and configure the providers. So I'll go to index.tsx where we are rendering our app. Before that, we need browser router as one of the provider to add the routes. Then we will need our authorizer provider. This will help us to manage all the login and logout state of the user. Authorizer provider expects some configuration, so we will need authorizer URL over here. Now authorizer URL is nothing but the URL that you obtain by installing authorizer instance on Railway, or this can be any URL wherever you have deployed your authorizer instance. So let's say you have deployed it on your own infrastructure, then you need to get that URL and provide that to authorizer React provider. Then we need to configure redirect URL. Let's keep it window.location.origin. And then we need client ID. So you can get the client ID from authorizer dashboard itself. So that pretty much configures our providers. Let's start this and see how our application is working. You will see a default React app that gets created for sure. So yeah, that is working correctly. Great. Next, let's go ahead and modify our app.tsx to make sure that our components that we need are rendered correctly and links are rendered correctly. So now that we have configured authorizer provider, what we actually get is we get some context. So you can use that context. So use authorizer is a context which gives us some states and some information. So we have loading state, we have user information. Okay. Now if there is a loading state, then let's render loading. Okay. So as you can see, loading is rendered. Let's put it in H1 so that it's more visible. Okay. Now once the loading is done, we will have two state. If the user is logged in, we will have the user object, else that particular object will be undefined or null. Okay. So what we can do is over here we can go ahead and add two condition that, so if user is present, then we want to render some components, and if user is not present, then we want to render something else. Okay. So if user is not present, let's render our login and home navigation. Okay. So what we can say that, we have a nav bar. Okay. We can have link from React router. Okay. To home, and then we will have link to login. Let's also render a div over here so that errors are gone. Okay, we need to import link, so let's import that. Import link from React router DOM. Okay, and if user is logged in, then what we want to show is user.email, and then we want to show a button to log out. Okay. So we already get a logout function with authorizer context, so we will use this. So on click of this, we want to log user out, so we will call logout. Okay, and you can also use the use navigate hook from React router. So, and on logout, let's say we want to navigate to homepage, so we will call this, and instead of login, I'll just replace with this. Alright, so we have our base app setup where we can say if user is logged in, then we will show this logout button and an email address. And if user is not logged in, then we will show two links. One is for home and another one is for login. Well, we also need to define those routes. So let's go ahead and define those routes. So path is home and the element would be the home element. Now instead of this, let's call our home component over here, and when route is login, we will call our login component over here. And in login, we can render the authorizer component itself, which will by default give us a login screen. So here I can say authorizer component, which we get from authorizer-react. So based on your configuration, so if you have configured, let's say Google and Facebook or GitHub authentication over here, authorizer component is smart enough to pick that up and render those buttons out there for you. So all you need to do is just render the authorizer component. And over here also you can say on login, you want to redirect user to homepage. So because that will be your dashboard, let's say. Okay. So let's say navigate to our default route, and let's use navigate over here. Alright, now that our components are configured, let's go ahead and just re-verify the flow once. So we are missing one thing over here. We need to define route for this particular thing. So let's say route path home, and this will be our dashboard. And one more thing that I'm missing over here is that we need to define all this under routes. So these are the routes. And let's also import the routes from React Router DOM. Alright, now that our application and routing is configured, let's test the flow once again. So as you can see here, I see that the home component is loaded. When I click on login, I'm routed to login screen, and here I can log in. So as soon as I'm logged in, I'm redirected to dashboard. Okay, and let's try logout. So as you see on logout, I'm redirected back to home. So our routing works correctly. All we need to do is now define our dashboard where you can actually create the to do and list the to do. Okay. So next thing that we need to do is we need to configure our urql client so that we can make the mutation and query request to our GraphQL endpoint. So in order to do that, what we can do is we can go to urql and the documentation. So as you can see, we need to configure this client and we need to do that in provider. Okay. So in our dashboard component, what we will do is we will define this provider. Okay. So a provider from urql is something that we need, and then we need to pass a value to that. And all we can do is we can configure this with cache exchange, fetch exchange. So we have our provider and we need to import client as well. Now this particular URL will be the one that you can grab from Hasura. So we saw that our Hasura instance provide this GraphQL URL. So we can copy that and put it over here. Also, we need to pass authorization header, right? Because we want to make the authorized request only. So as you can see, we can pass the fetch options over here, right? So I'll just pull this and add fetch option. All we need to do is grab this token. So we can grab the token using authorizer context. So use authorizer, and this hook has token information. Okay. So if we have token, then token dot id token is something that we would like to pass an authorization header. Well, that's great. So we have our provider configured. Next, we need to create a component which renders, like say, a form to create a to do and a list of to dos. So I will define a folder called components over here, and I will have file called todo.tsx. Okay, export default function to do, and we can render this as a child of this dashboard provider. Okay, now here you get access to all the hooks from urql because this is a child of the urql provider, right? So you can use the use query hook, use mutation hook, everything that you get over here. Okay, so let's try to do this. So we need to run something like this. So let's try to grab the to dos, and we can import gql from urql, and then we need use query as well from urql, right? Now our query is a bit different over here. Instead of to dos, we call it to do id title. Instead of title, we call it name, and then is completed or not. Okay, So we will have this use query. So query result, re-execute query, we have to do's query, great. So if query result dot fetching, then we want to show loading again, else we want to map that and list it. Okay, so we will have data query result dot data dot to do, and I know the type, so we can define the interface for to do, which has id as a string, name as a string, and is completed as a boolean. Okay, so this is of type to do type, let's call it to do type. Okay, and this returns a du which has to do, and let's end that du. Okay, great. So we have our component pretty much ready, whether it's completed or not. Okay, and we will also have one button which will allow us to update this. So if to do is completed, then mark as remaining, else you can mark it as completed. So you can update this particular boolean. Okay, and then we can have some style over here. Okay, so text decoration, if it is completed, then let's put a line through so it's more clear. Well, let's see how this component renders up. So I will log in. So right now there are no to do's, that's why you don't see anything. Okay, um so also let's put that condition over here, that if there are no to do's, so if query result dot to do dot length is equals to 0, then render this no to do's, else we would like to render this whole piece that we have developed. Okay, and that also we can render under a fragment. All right, so let's see. As you can see, there are no to do's at the moment. Now what we can do is we can add one form over here to create to do. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that form, and we will have a submit button. Button save type is equals to submit. Let's name this to do, id as well, to do. Okay, now we will have a handler const handle submit. So we can call this handle submit on submit of a form. Okay, and once the to do is submitted, let's also reset the form. So e dot current target dot reset. So this is the place where we actually need to write the mutation, and this function will become async in nature. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how we can write a mutation using urql. So this is the way that you can write a mutation. Instead of update to do, let's call it insert to do. Okay, and what we need is we need to pass a data over here. So data which is of insert type, so we can grab the types from here. So mutation root insert to do one. Okay, so we can have a type of to do insert input, to do insert input, and that is passed to insert to do one mutation. Okay, and that expects object which is data, and we get id, name, and is completed in return. Okay, so this becomes our insert to do mutation. Let's see how we can use this. So all you need to do is call this via use mutation hook. So insert to do result, insert to do, and we need to import this use mutation hook. Okay, great. So all we need to do is await insert to do, and there we need to pass a variable. Okay, so we have our data over here. So data will be having a name which is to do and a user id. Okay, so user id you can grab it using again the use authorizer hook. So const user use authorizer hook, and here you get user.id. So once the data is inserted, what we want to do is we want to trigger a refetch. So we will re-execute this fetch query. Okay, so that we can get a fresh set of results. Also over here, what we should do is while re-executing the query, we would like to get the fresh set of results. So here we can define the policies. Okay, request policy as network only, so that every time a new network request is made, we get a fresh set of results. Okay, great. Now one thing that we are missing is that using this insert to do result, we can disable this button. Okay, so disabled is equals to dot fetching. And yes, I'm not rendering errors over here, but you can also get the errors from all this set of results, and you can render them well based on whatever UI library you are using and however you are handling the errors. So let's go ahead and test this much. There are no to-dos right now. So I'll add one to-do, bring milk. So we are getting one error over here, is that we are violating a not null constraint. We also need to pass whether it's completed or not. So here I need to pass is completed as false. Okay, we could have configured in a way that by default this value is false. So over here now let's add one to do, and as you can see the to do is there. Okay, great. But it is rendered bit in a bit odd way. So I want that mark completed and bring milk are aligned in one single line. So what I will do is I'll just style this a bit, display flex, and instead of this let's render a div, because yeah, p takes a lot of space in flex, so you can use div over there. So now this looks bit better. I know this is not like a css tutorial, but yeah, this is just a full stack application development. You can make this more beautiful, of course. So next we need to add this update to do mutation so that we can mark this as a completed, right? And for that, what we need to do is we need to again create one GQL query. So this time let's name it update to do. Okay, and we can also know the update to do mutation. It's called update to do, where id is equals to dollar id and is completed is set whatever is passed as completed. So dollar is completed. Now I know that id is of type uuid over here, and is completed is of type boolean, and this particular mutation will return us the affected rows. Okay, great. So let's define one more mutation over here. and let's call it update to do result and update. Okay, I'll create a function over here, handle update, which has id and is completed, and then we call await update to do. We pass the variables id and is completed, and then we just re-execute so that we get a fresh set of to dos. This we can call it at this button. So on click of this button, we want to have this function which is handle update, and we pass to do and we pass inverse of whether it's completed or not. We disable this button when update to do result is fetching. All right, so let's mark this as completed. I think this is not working, so we must be having an error, right? So yeah, I think something is wrong with our mutation definition, where we are not calling this, and instead of that we are calling insert to do. Okay, so yeah, and we have a typo, so update to do result. All right, so now let's try to mark this as completed, and as you can see that this has been marked as completed. You can also mark this as remaining, and you can add more to dos. You can again mark them completed. So yes, this concludes our full stack application development. This is how you can have a nice authentication authorization plus your APIs ready out of the box using Hasura and Authorizer. And all you need to do is implement a nice UI. I hope this helps you in your application development, and I hope you have enjoyed this course. Thank you so much.